Good evening. Welcome to Designing Change, Applying Design Thinking to Change Management. Tonight's session is brought to you by ACMP Texas, San Antonio region, and I am Barry Bridges, your director of the region and host. In today's complex world, change is a constant. From disruptive technology to hybrid work environments to organizational transformation, change managers must adapt to meet the ever-changing needs of their stakeholders. How can we stay tapped into our stakeholders' needs when they are constantly changing? How can we bring fresh ideas to complex challenges? Well, enter design thinking, an iterative, human-centered approach. Applying the principles of design thinking to change management can help you generate fresh, innovative ideas that truly meet the needs of your key stakeholders. Tonight, we will explore the intersection of design thinking and change management. And tonight's presentation will be shared immediately following the session. Also, a recording of the session will be on the ACMP Texas YouTube channel soon. We're very excited to have not just the presentation, but some great interactions to come. And we're looking forward to those times together. For Molly, design is seeing the world as it might be rather than as it is. She works on a design strategy team, shepherding cross-functional teams through ambiguity to clarity on ambitious, broad, and hairy problems. She's previously worked at B2B design consultancies, helping leaders of large companies design their vision, strategy, culture, and organizational processes. She's endlessly curious and loves connecting dots between unexpected topics. Empathy and creativity are at the heart of Ann's work. She is currently a consultant at Propeller, specializing in change management, organizational transformation, and experience design. She has led successful change initiatives for Fortune 500 companies and organizations across a range of industries, including high-tech, biomedicine, and higher education. Please join tonight in welcoming Molly and Ann. We're delighted to have you, and take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Barry.
We're so excited to be here.
Yep. All right. Well, welcome. Whoops, here we go. So I'm Ann. I'm the consultant one, the change management one.
And I'm Molly. And as Barry said, I work in-house in design and visioning. And I really lead projects through design thinking. We're really excited to be here tonight. Tonight, we're going to dig into what design thinking is and why it matters for change management. We'll also share 4 mindset shifts and tools with you that you can actually use to bring design thinking into your day-to-day work.
So we have a few ground rules as we get started today. First off is low pressure participation. We're going to have opportunities for you to participate, but we get it. Sometimes you just want to watch a Zoom at the end of a long day and not be required to turn your camera on or have a conversation. So we're going to do everything in one main room today. We're going to give you some interactive things to work with, and we encourage you just to jump in as often as you want to or not. We're also going to ask you to make some assumptions. So we know often with events like this, we're asked to bring examples from our real jobs, but they're not always the best fit for what the topic we're learning is at the moment. So today we're going to be a little different. We're going to share a hypothetical change scenario with you, and then we'll use that for all the activities. Since it's completely fake, we're going to ask you just to kind of lean in with us and help create this scenario. So there won't be any right or wrong answers. We'll just ask you to kind of move in and help us flesh it out. And then the last one, yes and. So I'm not sure if anyone here is, likely are, familiar with the concept of yes and. So in improv, it's the idea that you want to keep building on people's ideas. You don't want to just shoot them down. It's like, oh no, that's not possible. But instead you lean into it and keep going. So I would say, for instance, Molly, what are you up to this weekend?
Well, I was really hoping on going on a long weekend trip to Mars. Do you want to join, Ann?
Oh yeah, that sounds awesome. I feel like maybe some sangria and potato salad. We could do a picnic, like have a nice, excellent spread. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think our dogs would really like a Martian environment. So they could play catch together with their favorite toys and maybe have a fun time while we're picnicking.
Can't wait to see it. So that's yes anding. It's rather than shooting down like, oh, we can't go to Mars, leaning in and kind of helping build the story. So we'll ask you to do that with us today.
So one thing that might have drawn you here tonight is the idea of design thinking. We really didn't want you to walk away from the night without learning what design thinking is in a really quick way. So I'd love to start with this quote from Tim Brown at IDEO. He says that the mission of design thinking is to translate observation into insight and insight into products and services that will improve lives. Design thinking is a way to learn from people, to develop and iterate on people-centered solutions, and ultimately to address the business challenges that many of us face. Design thinking is a problem framework rooted in empathy. We gather inspiration by observing real people to discover the hurdles they're facing in their day-to-day lives, with the goal of identifying different ways that we might be able to make their lives, these real people's lives, just a little bit better. We learn from a lot of people and a whole bunch of different sources. We take a wide variety of inputs, and through a series of synthesis tools, we crisply define the opportunity ahead of us. And then we get into the brainstorming part. We come up with a ton of different potential ideas of ways that we might be able to meet people's needs. The goal here is divergence. It's about getting past that first set of ideas in order to reach breakthrough ideas down the road. And with those ideas in hand, we determine which ones of these ideas we might want to bring to life. This could be a really low fidelity, something like a sketch on a Post-it note with a Sharpie and a Post-it. Or it could be a high fidelity experience, even the walkthrough of a customer experience in a physical location. The idea is to make the prototype real enough to feel. And with that prototype that's real enough to feel, we want to get these prototypes in front of real people as quickly as possible. The idea here is to fail early and fail often. It is way cheaper to get someone's feedback on a sketch on a Post-it note than on a fully realized experience. And we can use that feedback from real people to improve our ideas for the next round. Design thinking is often viewed as a linear process, where one step leads to the next, and the next step, and the next. And that when one step of the process ends, the next begins. But in reality, it's anything but linear. You're often bouncing between phases. It can be really helpful to think about these less actually as phases and more as modules or mindsets. You can mash up and recombine as needed to help you in any scenario. And that's the way we're going to look at design thinking tonight. We're going to talk about how you can apply the magic of these mindsets to your work as change managers.
So now I'll just do a little refresher reminder for Change Management 101. So we would define change management as the process that enables organizations to successfully achieve a desired future state. So change managers work to enact change as smoothly as possible. We're working to increase buy-in and engagement, to mitigate risks, to prepare our stakeholders, and to drive adoption. We have a lot of tools in our toolkit, but some common ones include stakeholder mapping, training, communication, building a guiding coalition, having pilots to generate quick wins, and developing change champions. So anyone who's worked in change management knows that there is no shortage of frameworks. I remember when I was getting my master's in OD, I was thinking literally everyone who's ever studied this subject came up with their own framework. And funnily enough, I actually did also. But that said, there are so many different ways you can do it. Why would you add one other kind of thing to the mix? Well, we're really thinking of this as mindset. So this isn't something that you would be doing separately. You wouldn't say, we're not trying to advocate for following a design thinking process for your change, but we're talking about looking at this in tandem with your change methodology to help you unlock creativity and get a deeper understanding of the big picture. So there's a few reasons that you might want to apply these mindsets. For one, design thinking experts often talk about wicked problems that seem difficult or impossible to solve because of incomplete, contradictory, and changing requirements that are often difficult to recognize. Design thinking mindsets can help change managers develop human-centered solutions by building empathy with their stakeholders, leading to high-performing teams. They can help generate a lot of creative ideas, which can be a huge help when battling change fatigue in an ever-changing landscape. They can help accelerate transformational change by developing unique solutions that are tested and vetted. And finally, it helps to embrace the ambiguity and come up with creative ways to move forward. So you might have heard some commonalities in how Molly and I were talking about design thinking and change management. And there is a lot of overlap between the two areas and also a lot of areas where they're different as well. As you can see in the purple spot in the middle, they're both rooted in people and empathy. Design thinking has a strong focus on exploration, embracing ambiguity, and purposefully diverging beyond what's expected, versus change management tends to lead on execution and implementation, driving alignment, encouraging adoption, and bringing new ways of working to life. So when we're talking about these mindsets, it's not just about leveraging the common purple space, but it's about bringing some pieces from the design thinking landscape into the change management space. And so just as Molly said, we're talking about, bringing some magic to our change management work. So now we're going to talk you through 4 mindset shifts to apply design thinking to your change management work. The first mindset is going from problem solving to problem finding. In change management, we're typically brought in to solve a specific problem, but it often turns out that the presenting problem is just the tip of the iceberg. We may be tasked with implementing a change and discover that there's a lot more work that needs to happen.
In design thinking, we're also often brought in with a business challenge, and we approach that presenting problem with curiosity. We explore and we ask if there might be an even bigger problem hidden just below the surface or around the corner. We call this problem finding. To get to the root of the problem, we observe people. We look at emerging industry trends, learn from analogous experiences, experts, and a whole bunch of other sources. We approach the given problem with a beginner's mindset and ask a lot of questions to begin to get our footing and ultimately get the opportunity to look below the surface at the many things that might be contributing to that presenting problem.
By shifting to problem finding, change managers can broaden their perspective about what the change is all about. Plus, taking a problem finding lens helps us think more broadly and inclusively and discuss aspects of the change that we didn't even realize were there. So as we mentioned, rather than us having you talk about your work, we're going to use a hypothetical example. So for the purpose of our activities today, let's say we have a luxury space tourism company. We can call them Lunar Escapes. They specialize in taking people out in orbit to have zero-G experiences, and they're working on an offering to allow people to go glamping on the moon. They started off small and scrappy, but they've been rapidly scaling in headcount and complexity of work as they face high demand. They're at the point when they need rigor and a formal reporting structure. A new SVP was hired a few months ago from a big tech company to help them bring rigor and structure to their work. She has aggressive goals and intense pressure from the CEO to get the team to operate more effectively and fast. She's decided that the best way forward is to do a reorg to create 5 core functional departments and an additional layer of management. But the employees at Lunar Escapes are tired. They've been having many changes already in the past year, and they're feeling growing pains. So that's the hypothetical scenario we're going to work with as we do this next activity. And if you remember what I was saying in the ground rules, this is fake. We're just going to ask you to make it up and use your creativity to help us, interact with this example.
So during tonight's exercises, we're always going to introduce new tools with every mindset shift. And if you're anything like me, you probably have a lot of questions and don't quite know how to approach the challenge that Anne just laid out. Let's start with a little bit of problem finding together by getting those questions out of our heads and into a shared space. Question storming can help us dig into the root of that presenting problem. For example, a question I have here is, what is space clamping? It sounds like that picnic that Em and I were going to go into on Mars, but that's just an assumption. So I just want to make sure that we're on the same page about this. Also, why did the SVP decide that a functional model would be best? What does she know that I don't know?
And some questions that I have would be, I assume that they have an extensive engineering team to be able to build all these experiences. So I'm curious, how would this reorg affect their ability to work collaboratively across functions? Also, I'm curious, what caused the change fatigue? So you can see there are so many different questions that bubble up. So what we're going to do now is do a short little activity, and we're going to ask you to just take a few minutes to drop as many questions as you can into the Zoom chat. There are no silly or incorrect questions. Everything's fair game tonight. And often when we're in a kind of diverging, open up new ideas space. Sometimes it's good to ask something really silly or unexpected to get to some really interesting insights. And for the Houston team that's in person, probably the easiest thing for you to do is just to mute yourselves and then have a conversation. And you can have the person in front of the laptop drop ideas in the chat, or you can skip the chat entirely and just enjoy your question storm together. Are there any questions about the activity before we unleash you to ask questions about our scenario? Sounds like no. All right. Well, go ahead and start dropping some questions in the chat.
I don't have any questions, but could you repost the assumptions or the?
Oh yeah.
That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, what questions do you guys have? You can just drop them straight into the chat. And then in a couple minutes, we'll start looking at everything together.
I love all these questions that are bubbling up.
So we'll just take maybe 30 or 45 seconds, come up with just a few more ideas, anything you have, and then we'll continue the conversation. All right, so this is really fun, and it's a thing we could do forever. But just for the purpose of today, we're just going to show you what would be kind of a potential next step. So if you see, I put some of these ideas on a mural board here. Molly and I started to sort them, and then we started dropping the extra ones down there. They were coming in fast and furiously. But if we were to be doing this activity, we could do this as a group where you could get people together, give them Post-it notes, have them actually come up with their questions. And then you could have them physically put them on a board, or you could use a collaborative tool like this. For instance, today we're using Mural, but there's lots of different things you could do. You could use a Google Doc. You could do any kind of collaborative thing if you're remote. Essentially what we're trying to do here is take the questions and kind of put them into bigger bucket pieces. So then from there we can strategize. What are we supposed to do? What is the priority in which we should tackle these? So we started to already kind of cluster things with some headlines. We had vision and direction, context, current landscape, change approach. So for instance, as we're getting new ideas, you could think, oh, is the right time for a reorg? That feels like a change approach question to me. External forces on the org could be a current landscape question. How is the change fatigue identified? You might want to do, I'd say, like, actually, no, this is more employee sentiment, for instance. And apologies if some people get a little seasick looking at a mural board moving around. So if you're one of those people, I apologize, but it will be over soon. So that's just an example. How is the change fatigue identified? Might be more current landscape, but basically the point is, this is just a way to look at all these inputs. You look together and you'd cluster them and see that. So what is the theme for the next happy hour? Why was there an SVP? When are we getting William Shatner involved? So many important questions.
I'm
Molly,
super curious from folks in the chat. Did anyone see someone else's question that they posted and use that principle of yes and to spark a new idea that you hadn't been thinking about before? That's something that I lean on a lot if we're doing this in person or even in a Google Doc, just to be able to build on each other's ideas and questions. It helps this power of groups just make even more ideas come to life. I got some questions around like, the reorg sounds super extreme. What's going on that led to this change, to this SVP joining the company at all?
Yeah. So
Jack,
this is
there's no cheating here. You should look at each other's ideas, and we're all about improv, yes, and supporting each other. It's very collaborative.
So if I were using this in my work, as I often do, I might lean on this early in the beginning of a project to kind of get a group of stakeholders together, or just do it by myself to start to kind of unlock this thinking. Because as you see, as we went on with time, hopefully you experienced the more questions you get out there, you realize the more questions you have and the more you can build. So I might do it early on as I'm trying to just define a change and understand it. Or I might do it later down the line if something comes up, you know, you get a curveball, a new direction, or things that feel kind of vague or complicated. And that could be another great time to just kind of sit down and think, okay, what questions do I have? How do I solve these? I really use this all the time. Like I said, sometimes I do it in groups. There's, as you saw, it's really fun to hear other people's ideas, but I'll even just kind of sit myself and just do a free write of all the questions that come up. And it can be very helpful just to kind of help you come up with a different approach. I'm going to click back from that. So we're going to go on to our next mindset shift, which is going from being business-centered to being people-centered. Now, in change management, we often have a chance to get a really deep understanding of the needs of the business, while our understanding and empathy for the many people impacted by our change sometimes can be a little bit more shallow.
As I mentioned before, design thinking really hones in on developing a depth of empathy for and understanding of the many people potentially impacted by our work. From our core stakeholder to the execs, to the interns, from the most high value partners to the very first time customer.
Taking time to understand the ecosystem of people impacted by any business change can help you better understand the opportunity. It can help people see value in the change, and ultimately it can help you land the change. So in our next exercise, we're going to introduce a tool to help us better understand the life and experience of 4 people directly impacted by our change scenario, the SVP, an exec, a more junior employee, and the end customer.
Empathy mapping is the tool we're going to talk about today. So empathy mapping is a really helpful way to get a more holistic understanding of the people impacted by your work. It can be done at all different stages in a project, like we did with question storming. It can be done in the really very beginning. You can create an empathy map with your early assumptions, and then you can also make it later on. You might have had interviews with these different people that you're building empathy for, and you can create an empathy map based on what you've learned in those interviews and the things that you've heard. I am going to copy a link and share it in the chat in just a sec. Working on it. And my computer's been a little bit funky, but I think I got it. All right. Link shared in the chat. So I just shared a link in the chat to a tool called, you guessed it, an empathy map. There are 4 slides in this deck that represent the 4 archetypes that Anne just mentioned. The SVP, an executive, a more junior employee, and the end customer. You could see on the slides on the left-hand side kind of where people are within the deck, and all of the titles are just at the very top. You're going to take several minutes to help us populate these maps. Think about what these different individuals within this ecosystem are thinking, feeling, and doing. For example, I imagine the SVP is hearing from some people in the company that they are unhappy and nervous. So I'm going to take from the SVP slide one of these boxes and note that they hear people are unhappy and nervous. And I bet they're also feeling a lot of pressure to make quick impact in their new role. So I'm going to make a copy of that one box and say that they're feeling pressure to make impact. And if you're having trouble at all adding ideas to the board, you can add them to the chat and we'll add them for you. Just let us know who it is and what's the box that they're filling out. And if you're getting a little bit stuck at all, that's totally okay. We have a bunch of prompts that Anna's going to share on her screen, and they're also listed in the speaker notes of each of the slide decks as well, in terms of different questions you might ask yourself with each of these quadrants of the empathy map. And if you're feeling that there's a lot of activity on one board, I see that there's a few fewer people on the board for the end customer. You can move around, and if you run out of space, just fill up the board and have fun with it. We're going to just give a couple minutes on the clock and fill out what you feel these folks might be needing to do, hearing, seeing, saying, thinking, and feeling. It looks like we have a lot of thoughts around the S. Do they feel like they need to do, or customer?
And we'll just take another maybe minute or so to add any other ideas you have, and then we'll come back together and chat about it. Okay, looks like we're slowing down on new ideas. So why don't we go ahead to shifting to chatting about what we've got? So it looks like when it comes to the SVP, you know, they need to do things like talk to their mentor, deliver results, see the big picture, follow my lead, check the pulse of the org. They could be hearing people being unhappy and nervous, whispers of another reorg, another new exec, you know, hearing that they need to see results and getting that pressure. Potentially hearing from employees that are considering leaving if big things come up. You know, seeing work slowdowns, frustration, saying, you know, will I get fired if I don't want to do this change? They might leave the org. They could put on a confident face. It'll all work out. And then on the other hand, if you're looking at the junior employee, if you kind of go to the other end of the spectrum here, you know, they might be hearing some gossip or speculation. They could be worried about job security. They could be talking about like, hey, this other company, they're not doing this, you know, or asking for advice. So many different possible ways. And you can see, we won't go into every single example at this point, but feel free to kind of keep clicking around and looking at it. You can see when you segment it this way, rather than just thinking about how are people feeling about the change, depending where you are, if you're internal, external, junior, senior, people could be feeling very different things about the change that you're enacting. So this can be a really helpful tool to build some deeper empathy. Now, Molly, do you have any insights that jump out at you when you're looking at kind of the different pieces we're seeing here?
Yeah, I think one thing that I just want to put a reminder out there, I feel some of the questions are just, what's going on? Why is this SVP coming in? What are they doing this thing? What's prompting all of this big change from many of the different perspectives? And I think that's a really cool thing that once you start to triangulate what's going on amongst all of this diverse group of people, you can start to bubble up questions that can bring into, all of this is based on our assumptions about lunar ventures, but we can start to say like, we need to go into interviews with the SVP, with junior employees, with execs, and learn from our end customer what they need, and start to use that to take our assumptions from this early round of empathy mapping and question our assumptions and see which of our assumptions were correct, which were wrong, and which ones we can get more nuance into based on actually working with the people that we're learning from and trying to support.
Yeah. So to yes and that for Molly, like this is, as you are starting off, this is a great activity that you can do to kind of get your assumptions out there and start to think, who could be these people? It could be a thing you could do together with your core change team, or you could just do it as yourself as you're thinking about it. But then as you go along, as you're doing your interviews, as you're doing your discovery to do any current state assessments, this gives you a great place to start to ask questions, to validate them, and to look at what are the themes that we need to address across. Also, are there different strategies we should have if we're rolling out to executive leadership versus junior employees, or what resources might we need to provide to customers if they realize their customer service person now has a different title. Any of those insights can be helpful. So this could be a fun tool to use at different phases of the project. All right, we're going to move on to our third mindset, which is going from seeking clarity to embracing divergence. So in change management, we're constantly dealing with the unknown. When we kick off a project, there's often a lot of ambiguity, and we're working to drive forward and gain clarity. With the high volume of unknowns, it can be really tempting to jump into systematically solving problems and driving forward without stopping to consider opportunities.
In design thinking, even when we really want to converge on an answer quickly, we purposely delay the answer to give ourselves more time to explore the many potential answers. The right answer might not be the obvious one. I'm curious for folks on this call, who's ever made pancakes? Raise your hand if you have video on, even if you don't. Even if you have all the right ingredients and are so jazzed for that tasty pancake, that first pancake you put on the griddle inevitably takes too long. It never browns up. It's just not good. it's really important to find ways to get past that first pancake or that first idea to the many, many other tasty pancakes that are possible. With our next tool, we're going to talk about new ways that you can go about creating a wide number of pancakes, how you can get past that first idea really quickly and really, really quickly move beyond it.
So this tool that we're going to talk about today is Crazy Eights, and it's a way to quickly create that first pancake and then move on next and see what are the other ideas that are out there. So Crazy Eights typically starts with a simple how might we question that you would brainstorm around. So here's an example of one. How might we generate excitement for the change? So we don't have time to actually do this hands-on with you today, so we're just going to explain the process and then show you a mocked up example. But typically what you do is you'd fold just any piece of paper into 8 pieces, or you could even take 8 Post-it notes. You just want 8 spaces. And the goal is to come up with 8 unique ideas in pictures and words in just 5 minutes. So you set a timer and you push yourself to keep moving on to a new idea rather than continually refining one existing one. So we wanted to show you an example. Molly and I kind of did this exercise a few days ago. And so this is how this could look. These are some different ideas that, we kind of came up with as we put some timer on and we were thinking about it. So you might start off with some expected ideas, having listening sessions with employees, training change champions. And then as time goes on, you might bring in some weird or wild ideas, like let's have Lizzo come to the workplace for a kickoff concert. It may seem silly to come up with the wild ideas because, after all, we've talked about, we're all constrained with time and budget and real world things. But sometimes even a most wild idea that seems completely impractical can hold a nugget of truth that you can bring into more down-to-earth ideas that are easier to carry forward. It's up to you to connect those dots. So for instance, maybe we don't have the budget to bring in Lizzo for a kickoff concert, but we like the idea of Lizzo's energy and we want to bring that kind of excitement. Or perhaps we're going to create a playlist for our kickoff event, or we like the idea of, okay, can we do something that's big that feels like it's really rewarding for employees? And continue down that road. So when you're doing this exercise, it's important to keep pushing yourself to thinking bigger, thinking crazy. What would we do if we had a limited budget? What if we had no budget? Any kind of fun thought starter questions can help you really unlock it. This is something that's super helpful, as we've talked about. If you hit change fatigue, if you have a group of people where you keep doing the same things every single time, this can be a really great way to bring in some new ideas. Just like we were kind of talking about in the beginning fireside chat part of this call, we were talking about some fun creative things you could do, and exercises like this help you figure those things out. So that's Crazy Eights. And I will also say, for everyone who's registered, we're going to send out the deck, but we'll also be sending this little activity guide we created for how to do these things on your own. So as you're watching it, this may feel like it's a lot. We're covering a lot and how would you do it? But rest assured, we'll actually be sending you a resource that's more details on, if you wanted to do this, how would you go about bringing that into your work? So our last mindset shift we're going to talk about is going from quick wins to quick failure. So in change management, we talk a lot about generating quick wins. And that's for good reason. Demonstrating quick and early successes is a tried and true way to build momentum.
In contrast, in design thinking, we actually really like to fail quickly. It might sound a little bit weird, and I get that, but take a minute and nerd out with me with a metaphor for just a second. Let's say you're on a really giant ship, lost in the center of the sea, with only a few days of rations left for you and the crew. The most dangerous thing you could possibly do is steer the whole ship in one direction. It's actually a lot safer to send 10 rafts out, one in every direction around your boat, and see if any one of them comes back having found land. Yes, you may have failed 9 times, but you have way more confidence in the direction to steer the big ship.
So what's an example of a raft or a quick failure in change management? One trick that I do is to share things with the core working group when they're 75% rather than fully baked, and encourage people to poke holes in them. It's widely documented that people tend to give more rich feedback if they feel like something is lower fidelity. So I apply that concept to change management, and we'll do things like, instead of presenting something as a beautifully polished deck, we'll do a collaborative session with a mural board or something like that. Or just like let them know like, hey, this is just an idea for you to react to, and really make it comfortable for them to say, hey, this is horrible, rather than like, oh, you must have spent 50 hours on that deck. Should I tell you this? So that's one easy way that I will send out some drafts, is doing things that are in a good spot, but not 100% perfect. Or I might reach out if I have some messaging that I'm going to go broadly to. I might purposely pre-screen it with someone who I know is resistant to the change, because I want to hear from them, like, what's hitting you wrong? Because that might be some areas that I could refine before hitting send to an entire company. Or I also might do a pre-mortem, and that's the tool that we're going to talk about today. So we're probably all used to doing post-mortems at the end of a project to talk about what worked, what didn't, and what we can do next time. So a pre-mortem just gets ahead of that. At the start of your project, you get together core stakeholders and set the stage that we're in the future, and I'm so sorry to tell you, but the change has failed. And so then you ask them why, and you get all these ideas from these stakeholders that can help you figure out if there's avoidable roadblocks in advance and help them build into your change plans. So if I were thinking of a stakeholder group, like you could, if you're thinking of what stakeholders to bring in, you could bring in just your core change coalition, but I actually found it to be especially helpful with cross-functional partners. So like, yes, your group of fellow change managers, your sponsor, those people probably have some top of mind examples, but maybe, you're the chief technology officer, may have some things that aren't on your mind or your roadmap at all, but some really realistic reasons that something could fail. So broadening the group of stakeholders can be really valuable to the extent you're able to do it. So we're going to do just a brief version of that today. We're going to pretend, it's April 2023. So sorry, but our reorg has totally failed. Why did it fail? And so we're just going to give you guys a couple ideas or a couple minutes to drop some ideas in the chat on why did this fail? It's April, like shoot, it was a total bust. What were the reasons it was a bust? So just spend a couple minutes and drop them in the Zoom chat, and then we'll have a conversation about what we're seeing. Everyone left the company out of fear. Exactly. It's terrifying. And feel free to build on each other's ideas. If you see things like Molly said before, if they cue ideas, then add more things here.
Oh my gosh, time travel and Groundhog's Day, but with the insight. Love it, Jack Frost.
Yes.
There wasn't buy-in, there's bad communication, the moon blew up.
Yeah. Wrong channels, bad timing. The roles weren't clear. What if you were a chief technology officer? What do you think, if it was April, if that was who you were, what might be some of the reasons that you come up with why it failed? Elon Musk built a better rocket, serious concern. Or think about, if you want to try on other hats as you're doing this, think about if you were, an HR BP, maybe what are some ideas that you might have had? Oh yeah, burned up all the energy for the core business. Other priorities, no change management team, no systems to support the reorg, poor stakeholder management.
It all happened during a major system upgrade.
Ah, yeah. So you can see these kinds of questions, they give you a lot of different potential areas that you could be going as a way to look into it. I mean, yeah, solar flares, definitely, so many possibilities. So for the sake of time, we're not going to do clustering and sorting like we did with question storming. But if this were real life, we would want everyone to be together, whether it's in person or virtually. You'd want to have everyone share out their ideas and then start to look at them and cluster for themes. So again, you could do this, have everyone have sticky notes. You could have one note taker who's just writing it down and have everyone call their ideas out. You could use Mural, you could use Google Slides like we did today. So many different things, but then you look through and see kind of what are the big themes, or also just what are the things that are really important. For instance, the tech upgrade, like, oh, we didn't realize there was going to be a whole new upgrade in this period of time. Now we have different people on it and it's going to fail. So this is just a really great tool to start to surface assumptions to help you figure out what are the things that you didn't even think about that could be part of the landscape, and to hear from different voices so that you can actually plan for them. We've all been in a postmortem where you sit there and you're like, oh my gosh, why didn't I think of this? I should have known this. So that is exactly what this exercise is to help get yourself in a failure mindset and think about what led there so that you can build your plans and go from there.
We always say that hindsight is 2020. This is a tool that helps foresight be 2020 as well.
Oh, I love that. Yep. Great. So we hope that the 4 mindsets we talked about today offer you some new ways to look at your work as change managers. Think of these mindsets as tools in your toolbox rather than a set process for you to follow for every project. And they can be scaled up or scaled down based on how much time you have. So often in my work, I may not necessarily have time to do a full question storming activity with a big group of stakeholders, but I may sit for a few minutes and just free write all the questions I can think of to start to unlock my thinking and even think about how do I even start to tackle this big, hairy change? Or I may not be able to build out a full empathy map, but that inspires me to think about deeper, unexpected questions I could ask in stakeholder interviews. For instance, instead of just like, how are you feeling about the change? We're like, oh, what are you hearing from your colleagues? What are you seeing? The deeper questions that can help you build that insight. Or else I may not do the full Crazy Eights activity, but I'll for sure look at my first idea and then try to add several other ones on top of it to help shake up that thinking. And these mindsets are really, they're just a taste. There is so much more that you can do. So as I mentioned before, Barry will be sending out a follow-up email that has the deck and the recording. And it also will have this activity guide that talks through exactly these pieces in more detail. And then as well as it'll give you some other resources if you get really excited about design thinking or facilitation, and you want to be able to try to do more things like this. We have some recommendations also for things that you can, other ways you can expand your thinking that way. Sorry.
Oh, I'm just really curious in the chat, or if anyone is brave enough to unmute themselves, I'm curious if there's anything that we talked about tonight, a tool or a mindset shift that was particularly sticky to you, you could see bringing forward into your day-to-day work, even starting tomorrow.
Yeah, I can share. I really like the quick failure part of it, where you are anticipating what the failures could be. And it's really important to get that ahead of things, because these days we don't have time. We don't have time to fail and wait for 18 months of the whole change management cycle to complete to be able to go and revisit it again. I really like that a lot. Thank you, Annie and Molly, to cover that part. It's tough, and I'm thinking as you're going through this exercise, we are actually going through changing our PTO policy, and I could actually see in those slides how the questions are arising, and also my whole area is like how the employees are going to react to the changes, and anticipating the questions will help a lot to get ahead of it. So thank you.
Great. So glad that was helpful.
I really liked the people-centered, the whole like the 4 roles, and having people actually think about what do you think they're thinking, and what do they hear, what do they see. I actually have a offsite leadership meeting happening next week, and now I'm really wanting to use that because we're trying to shift our culture, and I really need to know, do these leaders, what are they seeing, what do they feel, what's on their mind when they're trying to shift the culture. So I'm really excited to be able to use that. I really like it.
That's great. I'm glad you'll be able to have an opportunity so soon to test these tools out.
Yeah, thank you both very much for joining us and presenting, allowing us to join. I was thinking about that pre-mortem. Of course, I'm stuck on Groundhog Day and time travel, but in combining those 2 exercises with that Google Doc, so you have different perspectives. If I'm the SVP or a junior associate, if I'm looking at it today, and then I'm looking at future state, right? People are going through their prior experiences with what worked, what didn't work, and we can help them understand and see the typical things that cause failure, and they probably live those. So it would be interesting to do that pre-mortem based on role, where you assign someone a stakeholder role, you're this SVP or you're a junior associate, And now we're, a year down the road. What opportunity cost did we have because we missed out in adoption or training or awareness? And then if we conversely had succeeded, what would we have gained and the value? So just the combination of a couple of these tools and types of paradigms, I think is super powerful. So awesome. And thank you.
Great. Yeah, we're back to mashups again, right? Like thinking of how can we work with these things together? Well, how would you combine? I love that. Awesome. Well, really glad to hear that there's been a lot of resonance with what we talked about. We'd love to give you just a few more minutes. I know we're wrapping up soon, but are there any questions that you have about anything that we talked about?
How much time do you typically spend I know you mentioned about if you don't have enough time to do this whole exercise, typically if you see like people are cooperative and executives are on board, do you spend like half a day, 1 hour to the whole exercise?
That's a great question. Molly and I might have different approaches. So I'm curious your thoughts, Molly. But for me, I would say part of it, I think through the stakeholder group that I have and how much time that we have. So it could be something, I would say probably I would do default to an hour and 90 minutes for longer things. Something like question storming, I say, I would do that as part of another meeting. So I might do, or if there are additional pieces, because the activity, I think, when you put time on it, if you say, for 10 minutes or 15 minutes or something, like it's force people to keep coming up with ideas, and then you'd have still a long runway to do clustering and some discussion. So I would say typically I schedule an hour and 90 minutes for these types of activities, just depending if you scale up or scale down, or you can do a day where you kind of string some different types of things together and you bring the group along through that. Molly, what would you say?
I think something that's just really cool about each of these tools is that the tool itself is helping support that mindset that you're trying to bring to life. So you could see how quickly we were able to get value out of an empathy map and out of question storming and out of a pre-mortem, doing all of those activities within 1 hour. But that doesn't mean that's the right way to go about it for any specific change exercise or work activity that you're just trying to do in general. Any of these mindsets and activities could scale up and scale down based on the needs that you have. You could take literally 5 minutes and try to come up with 8 different ideas to a challenge you're solving. And that's taken you 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But you could also bring together your whole change coalition or cross-functional team and build an entire ideation workshop together. That could be anywhere from 90 minutes to a full day. And it can be super engaging and participatory.
Yeah.
And neither of them is wrong. And that's really cool.
Nice. One last question based on that. Do you give them any pre-work before they come to the workshop, or?
One thing that I find really helpful is just making sure that folks have the appropriate level of context to get on the same page as you quickly. You probably have a lot of knowledge in the space that, especially a cross-functional team or folks outside of your core change coalition, might need to get up to speed pretty quickly. So that could either be through something like pre-work or through lightning talks as a part of the workshop. There's different ways, but just making sure that folks have the appropriate level of context to be able to answer the questions that you're bringing to them.
Thank you.
Hey, Molly, and thank you so much for your presentation. I have a very fundamental question. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. See, sadly, we recognize that change management itself is an afterthought. Very rarely we are there at the beginning. We somehow get pulled in when things don't work. So now you have change management coming as an afterthought, and you have design thinking. So what is the appropriate timing to introduce the concept of design thinking into change management, assuming it's an afterthought?
Yeah. So I actually, as we built this, I was very mindful of that, being a change manager at Propeller. Like I'm used to being brought in at all different phases.
Right.
And I've seen, quite often that is something we experience. So it's not that we're blue sky, but we're actually, okay, we decided we need to do the reorg. Here you go. And so that's how we actually picked all these tools with that in mind, because even if you're brought in and you unfortunately can't change. You may not agree with the change, but you might be in the position that you have to implement it anyway. Our thinking with these tools is they can help you still look at those problems in an interesting way and help you think about when it's question storming, like what are the things that I can control? What are the different pieces? So you could use it as you're planning your rollout, as you're planning your communication. Empathy mapping you could use if you have to think through what is the different messaging, how would you segment your stakeholders? So that is also one of the reasons that when we looked at it, I was saying early on that we're looking at this as mindsets, we're not looking at this as process.
Right.
One of the reasons was that as well, because we don't always, as the change manager, don't often have the luxury of coming in and getting to completely design the change as well. Sometimes we'll just be brought in for implementation. So the great thing with mindsets is that you can put them on at any time in the process, wherever you are, and kind of think through, hey, what are the different ways I can look at this? How can I look a different direction and bring some creativity wherever I am?
No, I love the idea. I definitely love the idea. And I do believe that we are doing that in change management, the post-mortem that you said, where we anticipate a lot of things beforehand by, surveys or whatever. So I do believe that this particular design thinking and the mindset change would definitely be a very good icebreaker for all the plans you have in the change management. That's my firm belief. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thank you everyone for having us. I know Barry had some wrap-up pieces, so I'll pass the mic over to that. But thank you everyone for spending your evening with us. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you for being so engaged and engaging. It was so fun to see you all pop up in the chat and in the Google Doc all over the place, participating, going along with us on this wacky change management scenario. It's really exciting that y'all were in it with us.
And a big thanks to Barry.
Thanks, Barry.
Yeah, well,
Thanks.
thank you all for being with us tonight. We're super excited to have had Houston live in person and an official hybrid meeting. And just want to remind you, ACMP Texas chapter is a dynamic professional community recognized as vibrant and growing source of change management talent and expertise. And tonight you got a glimpse of that, the excitement and the interactions that we have always when we're together. So glad to have you with us tonight. Thanks again, Ann, Molly. Great session. Look forward to hearing back on all the feedback that people have and that great ideas in the future. The session will be posted on YouTube when we get it edited, and we will notify everyone. We'll also be sending out in a few minutes here the slides and the handouts that were mentioned. Thank you for being with us tonight, and you all have a great evening.